Have you ever instantly regretted inviting someone inside your house? You spend all day cooking, and suddenly a guest is packing up the best cuts of meat into their own Tupperware before anyone even gets a plate. Prepare yourself for the 55 weirdest complaints about dinner parties and guests. From people snooping in your bathroom to complain about expired lotion, to guests digging through your trash just to prove your food is fake. These wildly entitled stories will make you want to eat alone forever. 1. An eccentric aunt came over for a major holiday meal and immediately started packing up the absolute best cuts of meat into her own plastic containers before a single person had even grabbed a plate. When her sister told her to at least wait until after dinner was served, she argued that premium turkey slices dry out if exposed to room temperature oxygen for more than 10 minutes. She essentially built a massive fortress of mashed potatoes in her personal cooler bag, while the rest of the family was still standing around waiting to say grace. 2. During a casual gathering, one guest attempted to chase the host's shy rescue dog around the living room to get a selfie, but the dog bolted and knocked over a floor lamp in the process. Instead of apologizing, the guest complained that the dog was aggressive and demanded the host keep the animal in a crate for the rest of the night. They insisted that a well-behaved pet should naturally gravitate toward their specific energy, even if that energy involved aggressive petting and loud noises. 3. A guest arrived at a milestone birthday dinner and immediately tried to sit at the head of the table, claiming that their status as the eldest relative gave them the right to the seat of honor. When the birthday person politely asked them to move, the guest declared that the host clearly had no respect for traditional family hierarchies and refused to touch their food for the rest of the evening. They sat there with their arms crossed, pouting like a toddler while everyone else tried to enjoy the cake. 4. You know that feeling when someone brings a gift that is secretly an insult? One host received a high-end vacuum cleaner from a guest right as they sat down to eat. The guest casually mentioned that they noticed a speck of dust on the rug near the entryway and thought the host could use a little help with their housekeeping skills. It was meant to be a helpful gesture, but the entire table went dead silent as the host stared at the heavy box sitting right next to the gravy boat. 5. During a nice Thanksgiving dinner, an uncle threw an absolute tantrum because the television in the living room was turned off. He complained that forcing people to make awkward small talk during a major football game was a form of psychological torture. Without asking permission, he grabbed the remote, cranked the volume to maximum, and dragged his dining chair right into the living room while the turkey got cold, leaving his embarrassed wife to awkwardly apologize to the rest of the silent family. 6. During a summer barbecue, a guest demanded that the host provide a detailed list of the exact genetic origin of every vegetable in the salad. They weren't satisfied with organic or locally sourced. They wanted to know the specific farm coordinates and the name of the person who picked the kale. When the host admitted they bought the greens at a standard grocery store, the guest spent the next hour lecturing the table about the dangers of mysterious grocery store produce, while aggressively eating nothing but a dinner roll. 7. During a seafood night, a guest complained that the shrimp were too small and demanded to know why the host didn't buy the jumbo size instead. They claimed that peeling tiny shrimp was a waste of their valuable time, and that the host should have considered the physical effort involved for the guests. They actually left the table to go get a snack from their car because they felt the host had intentionally provided a meal that required way too much manual labor and effort. 8. During a backyard party, a guest insisted on moving the entire dining setup to the other side of the lawn because they didn't like the way the sun was hitting their forehead. When the host explained that it was impossible to move the heavy stone table, the guests sat in their car for 2 hours, returning only when the sun went down. They then complained that the evening air was too chilly and demanded the host provide a heating lamp for the rest of the group. 9. During a fancy soup course, a guest asked the host to provide a written ingredient list because they were on a strict diet that prohibited anything that had ever seen a sunrise. They claimed that night-harvested vegetables contained a different level of nutrients, and eating something picked during the day was basically setting themselves up for a migraine. The host had to pull out a smartphone to search for the harvest habits of carrots, while everyone else just sat there waiting for the chance to finally eat. 10. A guest brought their own set of cutlery to a dinner party because they were convinced that the host's silverware was not being polished with the right grade of microfiber cloth. They spent the evening loudly buffing their fork with a special silk napkin they kept in their pocket, making sure everyone knew their equipment was superior to the house set. The sound of squeaking metal against fine china was enough to make every other guest reconsider their friendship with the person. 11. One guest refused to eat anything because the host served the salad on square plates instead of traditional round ones. They argued that square plates have sharp corners that disrupt the natural flow of digestion and cause unnecessary stress on the stomach. The guest spent 20 minutes explaining this pseudoscience theory to the entire table, while everyone else was already halfway through their first course. Seriously, have you ever met someone who blamed their poor mood and lack of appetite on the geometry of the dinnerware? 12. During a casual backyard barbecue, a guest demanded the host provide a formal seating chart because they were afraid of being placed next to someone who might talk about their political leanings or local news. When the host laughed it off as a joke, the guest actually pulled out a roll of neon masking tape and began marking off their own section of the picnic table. They sat in total isolation for the rest of the night, staring at their paper plate like it was a boundary line in a war zone. 13. A guest showed up to a formal dinner party with their own pre-made meal in a plastic container because they claimed the host's kitchen wasn't certified for their specific brand of gluten-free, keto-vegan lifestyle. They didn't just bring the meal, they asked the host to heat it up in a separate, unused saucepan and serve it to them on a clean tray. It was incredibly awkward watching them microwave a frozen burrito while everyone else enjoyed fresh prime rib and good conversation. 14. One visitor complained that the host's house was far too quiet and insisted on playing their own collection of chaotic, upbeat jazz at high volume during the entire meal. They said the natural conversation was too depressing and needed a musical backdrop to stop the mood from becoming too serious. When the host politely asked them to turn it down, the guest claimed that silence was a sign of a failed social gathering and they were actually doing everyone a massive favor by providing a soundtrack. 15. Imagine a guest who insisted on checking the host's pantry before sitting down to eat. They wanted to ensure that no products from a specific brand were stored in the cupboards, claiming those companies were responsible for the decline of modern society. They actually spent 10 minutes reading labels while the hot soup was getting cold on the table and the wine was losing its chill. Do you think people have become way too obsessed with policing what other people keep in their own private homes? 16. A guest refused to use the bathroom in the host's house because they didn't like the specific brand of liquid hand soap provided in the dispenser. They claimed the floral scent gave them a mild allergic reaction and instead chose to leave the party for 40 minutes to find a gas station bathroom that matched their personal standards. They came back smelling like industrial cleaning supplies, looking completely satisfied that they had successfully avoided the horrors of a generic lavender-scented soap pump. 17. During a casual birthday dinner, one attendee complained that the host did not provide enough ice for their single glass of soda. They counted exactly 4 cubes in their drink and argued that a standard refreshing beverage requires a minimum of 6 to keep the temperature stable until the end of the meal. The guest actually stopped the birthday toast just to ask if the freezer was broken, making the entire room feel like they were witnesses to a truly bizarre and exhausting act of pettiness. 18. One guest was deeply offended because the host served the main course 10 minutes later than the time stated in the initial group chat invitation. They treated the timeline like a strict military operation and started checking their watch every 30 seconds once the clock hit the mark. They eventually suggested that the host pay for their parking since the extra 10 minutes of waiting caused them to hit a higher rate on their local city meter. Is it normal to demand a financial refund for being late? 19. A guest brought their own folding chair to a dinner party because they didn't believe the host's furniture was ergonomically designed for their spine. They explained that their personal chiropractor specifically advised against sitting on anything without adjustable lumbar support, which apparently included every single chair in the host's entire dining room. It made for a very strange sight, with one person perched on a high-tech office chair while everyone else sat on standard wooden seats, making them look like a corporate manager crashing a family event. 20. One guest decided that the ambient music playing softly in the background was distracting them from their internal monologue. They stood up in the middle of a delicate main course and unplugged the entire sound system, claiming that silence was the only appropriate flavor for a meal of this caliber. They then sat back down and stared at their plate with such intense concentration that no one else dared to finish their wine. It was like living through a mime performance where the audience was the one being held hostage. 21. A dinner party took a bizarre turn when an uninvited guest arrived with a fully portable air purifier and asked to be plugged into the main power strip. They claimed the host's scented candle was giving them negative vibrations and insisted on creating an ionized bubble around their chair for the entire duration of the soup course. The host watched in disbelief as the guest adjusted their breathing mask while sipping wine through a straw, pretending the rest of the dining room was essentially a toxic wasteland. 22. One homeowner hosted a sophisticated wine and cheese night, but things turned south when a guest started measuring the temperature of the refrigerator with a laser thermometer. They weren't just checking the wine. They were concerned that the chilled appetizers were exactly 3 degrees above the recommended health safety guidelines they pulled from a random internet forum. It reached a point where they refused to touch a single cracker, claiming the atmosphere was a breeding ground for invisible bacteria. Honestly, do you think some people are just looking for reasons to act superior? 23. And grandmother spent the entire dinner critiquing the host's lasagna, constantly reminding the table that her mother-in-law had a vastly superior recipe involving secret ingredients the host clearly ignored. She kept pointing out how the texture was wrong and how the sauce was lacking that specific flavor only a true family matriarch could achieve. By the time the dessert arrived, the host was ready to hide in the kitchen just to escape the relentless comparison to a recipe from 40 years ago. 24. A guest suddenly accused the host of trying to poison them because the salad dressing contained a hint of walnut oil, despite never mentioning a nut allergy to anyone during the RSVP process. They caused such a massive scene, claiming they felt their throat closing up, that the host had to call an ambulance for what turned out to be a mild case of post-dinner anxiety. The guest then had the audacity to bill the host for the copay of the emergency room visit. 25. Imagine inviting a friend over for pizza night, only for them to demand you throw it all away because they decided to start a raw food cleanse 3 minutes after arriving. They stood over the kitchen island, watching everyone else eat, and lectured the group about the enzymes being destroyed by the oven heat. Eventually, they ordered a giant kale salad for delivery and made the host pay the delivery fee because they claimed the house environment was not conducive to their health goals. 26. One guest was furious that the host decided to serve a craft beer from a local brewery instead of the specific imported light beer they prefer. They spent the entire evening making loud, sarcastic comments about how the host was clearly trying to force a trendy lifestyle on their friends. They eventually walked 3 blocks to a corner store to buy their own 6-pack, brought it back to the dinner table, and proceeded to drink it, while refusing to acknowledge any of the food being served. 27. You wouldn't think someone would complain about the lighting, but a guest once insisted that the overhead chandelier was causing their aura to look washed out in group photos. They forced the host to move the entire dinner spread from the dining room to the hallway, because the hallway had better fluorescent lighting for their social media profile. Imagine the chaos of moving piping hot plates of lasagna through a narrow corridor just because someone was worried about their digital appearance. Do you think social media has made people lose their minds regarding basic etiquette? 28. A distant cousin showed up to an intimate dinner party and immediately started rearranging the host's bookshelf, claiming the organization was causing them mental clutter. They spent the first 30 minutes of the party pulling books off the shelves and sorting them by color, ignoring the appetizers entirely. When the host finally asked them to stop, the cousin got offended, saying they were just trying to help make the home look presentable before the other guests arrived. 29. One attendee at a dinner party brought their own personal scale to measure the portion sizes of the turkey. They claimed they were counting macros for a fitness competition and didn't trust the host's eyeball estimates of what constituted a serving. When the host served them a slice that was slightly larger than their calculated allowance, they weighed it, complained about the excess calories, and then tried to scrape the extra ounces back onto the serving platter in front of everyone else. 30. A guest was deeply offended because the host used a different tablecloth than the one they had used at their own party 3 months prior. They argued that by using a new pattern, the host was implicitly saying the previous party was inferior and that they were trying to outdo them. They spent the entire evening trying to guess the price of the new cloth, loudly speculating that the host was spending money they didn't have just to compete with their superior sense of style. 31. Imagine throwing a casual summer cookout, and your new neighbor pulls you aside just to complain about the acoustic properties of your ice cubes. This guy deadpan looked you right in the eye and said the ice was entirely too loud when it clinked against his glass. He demanded crushed ice instead of standard cubes because the high-pitched ringing was totally messing with his ability to enjoy a simple plate of potato salad. Who even notices the specific pitch of their beverage? Do you think some folks just wake up desperate for something to be mad about? 32. A coworker showed up to a relaxed Friday wine night and threw an absolute fit over a standard grocery store charcuterie board. Why? Because nobody provided a detailed, color-coded diagram of the cured meats. He accidentally popped a piece of spicy capicola into his mouth, thinking it was just mild prosciutto, and acted like he had been poisoned by a medieval assassin. He spent 20 minutes arguing that mixed appetizers should be legally required to have tiny warning flags stuck in them. It completely ruined the laid-back appetizer vibe for everyone else in the room. 33. Imagine hosting a formal dinner party where you spend 3 days prepping a gourmet beef Wellington, only to have a guest demand you drive them to a nearby fast food joint halfway through the meal. This person actually sat at the table, stared at the medium-rare masterpiece, and loudly announced that they only eat chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs. They insisted the house smelled too much like onions and that a trip to the local drive-thru was the only way to save their evening. Seriously, would you kick them out or just point to the door? 34. Have you ever seen someone refuse a delicious bowl of hot homemade French onion soup just because the silverware was too shiny? A college buddy sat at the dining table covering his eyes, claiming the polished reflection on the back of his spoon was distorting his features and making him lose his appetite entirely. He loudly asked the kitchen for a plastic spork instead, stating that he absolutely refuses to consume any liquid meal while staring at a weird funhouse mirror version of his own forehead. 35. One buddy brought his brand new girlfriend to a cozy pasta night, and she practically had a full-blown meltdown over the house internet setup. The main issue was that the Wi-Fi password was 20 characters long, which she aggressively claimed took way too much physical effort to type out on her phone. She complained that by the time she connected and uploaded her picture of the garlic bread, the butter had melted incorrectly and completely ruined her social media aesthetic. Would you just turn off the router at that point or tell her to use her own mobile data? 36. During a friendly weekend game night dinner, a guy from the local gym complained that the heavy wooden dining chairs did not swivel. He was deeply annoyed that he had to physically turn his neck to look at whoever was speaking across the room. He passionately argued that stationary furniture forces unnecessary strain on the upper back and accused the homeowners of not caring about their friend's long-term spinal health. He literally ate his massive slice of pepperoni pizza standing up in the corner of the room just to avoid turning his head. 37. Picture this scenario. You bake a flawless, golden brown cherry pie from scratch, and your brother-in-law completely loses his mind because you cut it into 7 slices instead of 8. He firmly refused to eat his piece, claiming that odd numbers create an unbalanced, chaotic energy in the human digestive tract. He actually tried to mash the remaining slices back together on the glass tray to recut them into an even number, completely destroying the flaky crust in the process, just to satisfy his weirdly specific numerical superstition. 38. A new neighbor was invited over for a simple, easygoing Taco Tuesday and spent the entire evening harshly critiquing the authenticity of the store-bought sour cream. Even though you are sitting in a random suburb in Ohio, this guy acted like a Michelin star culinary historian, complaining that real street tacos do not use dairy products squeezed from plastic bottles. He completely ignored the fact that this was just a fun, cheap family dinner and dramatically ate plain tortilla chips while sighing heavily every 3 minutes to show his deep disappointment. 39. Imagine pouring someone a refreshing glass of iced tap water, only for them to take one tiny sip and declare that it tastes entirely too municipal. A woman from a local book club aggressively pushed her glass away, complaining that the liquid felt too harsh on her tongue and completely lacked the soft minerals of natural mountain spring water. She then seriously asked if anyone had an empty pitcher so she could go outside and harvest some fresh evening dew from the front lawn instead. How do you even respond to that kind of absurd request without laughing in their face? 40. At a casual neighborhood potluck, a friend of a friend demanded that the background music be changed immediately because the beat did not match his natural chewing rhythm. He was trying to enjoy a slightly tough piece of grilled steak and said the slow jazz track was subconsciously forcing him to chew way too slowly, which was exhausting his jaw muscles. He actually walked right over to the Bluetooth speaker and put on a high-tempo underground techno playlist just so he could finish his meal at a brisk, highly productive pace. 41. A coworker was furious at the end of a holiday potluck because the homeowners didn't provide high-end glass storage containers for takeaways. This guy actually expected to walk away with 3 days of free meals and threw a massive fit when handed standard plastic zip bags. He complained that cheap plastic would completely ruin the delicate flavor profile of the smoked brisket by morning. Have you ever encountered someone who treats a friend's kitchen like a complimentary restaurant with a full takeout service? 42. Picture inviting your college buddy over for a massive backyard barbecue centered around slow-smoked ribs. He shows up completely empty-handed and immediately complains that there are 0 plant-based meat substitutes on the grill. Apparently, he adopted a strict vegan lifestyle just 3 days prior, but conveniently forgot to tell anyone. Instead of just quietly eating the grilled corn and side salad, he loudly lectured everyone about their carbon footprint while aggressively glaring at the main meat platter. 43. A neighbor arrived at a casual weekend get-together and was visibly angry because they had to park 2 houses down the street. They actually interrupted the appetizers to demand the homeowners move their own vehicles out of the driveway to make room. The walk was literally less than 40 seconds, but this person complained that their expensive designer shoes weren't meant for navigating public sidewalks. Honestly, how wildly entitled do you have to be to kick someone out of their own personal driveway? 44. Imagine making it crystal clear that your anniversary dinner is a strict adults-only event, only for a cousin to show up with 3 chaotic toddlers in tow. She immediately complained that the dining table had sharp corners and demanded you hide all the expensive wine glasses. When the roasted duck was finally served, she acted completely offended that nobody prepared a separate batch of dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets for her kids, blaming everyone else for her own total lack of planning. 45. An acquaintance excused herself to use the restroom right before the salad course and was gone for a suspiciously long time. When she finally returned, she had the absolute audacity to complain that the expensive face creams in the medicine cabinet were past their expiration dates. She actually lectured the entire table about the dangers of using expired skincare products, completely outing herself as a shameless bathroom snooper in front of a dozen deeply uncomfortable people just trying to eat their meal. 46. A self-proclaimed minimalist guest refused to sit on the host's velvet dining chairs because they claimed the fabric had too much negative energy stored in the fibers. Instead, they brought their own collapsible wooden stool and set it up 2 feet away from the table, forcing everyone to shout across the gap just to hear them speak. When asked why they couldn't just use the furniture provided, they explained that they only trust surfaces made of untreated pine. Does this level of pickiness ruin the vibe for everyone else? 47. A buddy was specifically asked to bring a nice bottle of red wine for a fancy steak dinner. He showed up with a half-empty $3 bottle of generic grocery store table wine that he clearly opened days ago. To make matters worse, he completely ignored his own cheap bottle, drank 4 glasses of the expensive Cabernet the homeowners provided, and then loudly complained that the good wine was a little too dry for his refined palate. Do you immediately stop inviting people like this to your house? 48. One friend complained that the dining room was way too stuffy and, without asking anyone, cranked the thermostat down to 60 degrees in the middle of January. Everyone else at the table was visibly shivering and wrapping themselves in living room throw blankets just to survive the main course. When someone finally suggested turning the heat back up, the guy claimed that eating in a freezing room actually burns more calories and they should all be thanking him for the massive health favor. 49. A relative decided to completely ignore the serving utensils and used his own half-eaten fork to scoop a massive portion of baked mac and cheese from the communal bowl. When his sister gently called him out on the gross behavior, he got incredibly defensive. He complained that his own family was treating him like a walking biohazard and claimed that sharing germs is just a normal part of building a strong immune system. He basically sulked in the corner for the rest of the night, completely ruining the dish. 50. A co-worker showed up exactly 2 hours late to a scheduled dinner party, long after everyone else had finished eating and moved on to dessert. Instead of apologizing for the massive delay, she complained that the remaining chicken was cold and demanded someone heat it up for her. She then spent the next 20 minutes heavily criticizing the side dishes, acting like she was a professional food critic, evaluating a restaurant rather than someone who completely missed the actual party because she couldn't manage her time. 51. A lifelong friend demanded a strictly gluten-free and dairy-free menu weeks before a dinner party, forcing the homeowners to buy expensive specialty ingredients. Halfway through the main course, she casually reached across the table and ate a massive, butter-soaked crescent roll. When gently reminded about her severe allergy, she threw a massive fit, complaining that she was being aggressively food-shamed for having a cheat day. Seriously, why even demand a special menu if you are just going to eat the bread anyway? 52. Picture serving a massive holiday feast, only for your sister-in-law to flatly refuse to believe your garlic mashed potatoes were made from scratch. She loudly complained that the texture was entirely too perfect and accused you of trying to pass off instant grocery store flakes as a homemade side dish. She actually excused herself to the garage and started digging through your recycling bin, looking for cardboard boxes just to prove her insane culinary theory to the rest of the deeply confused family. 53. An old roommate showed up to a formal apartment gathering with a massive, completely uninvited golden retriever. Within 5 minutes, the excited dog slid across the smooth kitchen tile and crashed into the refrigerator. Instead of apologizing for the chaos, the guy immediately complained that the polished floors were a massive safety hazard for his animal. He actually demanded the homeowners lay down a series of expensive yoga mats so his dog could comfortably walk around the kitchen without losing traction. 54. During a neighborhood block party, one couple realized they were seated at the far end of the long dining table near the patio door. They immediately complained that they were being deliberately isolated from the main conversation and treated like second-class citizens. Without asking, they physically dragged their heavy metal chairs over to the absolute center of the table, forcing a married couple to awkwardly split up just so these two could aggressively dominate the primary group discussion. 55. Imagine watching a buddy pack up half of your expensive leftover smoked salmon into his own plastic container, only for him to complain about your refrigerator settings. He argued that your kitchen was kept 1 degree too warm, which would supposedly compromise the structural integrity of his stolen fish on the car ride home. He actually asked you to provide a small bag of frozen peas to use as a makeshift ice pack so his free luxury meal wouldn't be ruined. Do you think people lose all sense of shame when free food is involved? So, are you ever hosting a dinner party again? Or are you officially banning everyone from your dining room forever? Out of all 55 complaints, which guest made you want to scream the loudest? Drop your most ridiculous, unhinged hosting stories in the comments below. I want to read every single one. If these absurd guests made you laugh, lose your mind, or completely relate, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and keep your doors securely locked.